if someone is going to train with weightlifting movements in general, they should probably start with pulling variations before getting into catching variations. One of the things that catching variations do is they certainly add a unique skill to be able to catch the bar. And someone who has developed the ability to pull properly may actually need that novel training stimulus of adding that skill.
Hi, Tim. It's my pleasure to have you on Evidence Strong Show. If you could briefly introduce yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Dr. Tim Suchomel. I am currently an associate professor at Carroll University, but actually will be switching universities starting September 1st. I will be at the University of Pittsburgh, where I will also be an associate professor there and the director of the sports science program.
That's exciting. Awesome. So I invited you to talk about one specific paper, which is titled, Can the Velocity of 1 RM hang power clean be used to estimate 1 RM hang high pull? So that's what we're talking about. But your expertise is in using weightlifting with athletes and testing athletes using weightlifting derivatives. So why this test? That would be my first question. And why would you want to test athletes in general using weightlifting derivatives?
Sure. Yeah, we know that weightlifting movements are, just go back to weightlifters in general, are some of, if not the most powerful athletes in the world, which is why a lot of strength and conditioning coaches have, erred on using these movements when training for their athletes, whether they are weightlifters or sport athletes that just use them in training for a variety of reasons. Obviously, the ability to provide a strength power overload stimulus is really relatively easy with these movements. Some of them, especially some of the pulling variations, are really easy to learn. Obviously, some of the main lifts may take a little bit longer, but if you're a good coach, then take that long to teach. But also the kinetic and kinematic similarities to some of the movements that we have in sport. So you could even relate coming out of the blocks and sprinting to a pull or a clean from the floor or a snatch variation as well. But also you can think about the sprinters where they are at top speed. They're also going to be hitting some of those same angles, a shallower knee angle, but still needing to produce a lot of force vertically, which is why we can use these movements quite broadly with a variety of athletes. But the reason why we did this project was I remember having a conversation. I can't remember what NSCA conference it was, but I had a conversation with Greg Hoff, and he had asked the question about, Tim, we know that, from your research and Paul Comfort's research that, weightlifting pulling variations are effective, but how do we load them? And the general question is, how do you load them if you're not going to do a 1 RM catching variation? Because the vast majority of the research, if not all the research, has used a catching 1 RM just to look at pulling variations. So a lot of our research has compared pulling variations with catching variations while using relative loads of a 1 RM catch. So, for example, a hang clean 1 RM or a jump shrug and a hang high pull. So the kind of the process of this study was seeing if we could estimate what a 1 RM hang high pull was using a 1 RM hang power clean test and kind of looking at the, for lack of a better term, a terminal velocity or what velocity they actually achieved their 1 RM at. So because we're looking at weightlifting movements, they're ballistic in nature. We're trying to be as fast as possible. So we attached a gym aware device to the bar, and we were looking at peak barbell velocity during a 1 RM test. So they went through and did warm-ups, they did their actual 1 RM, and we took the average, we actually took the 1 RM of each individual person, looked at the velocity, and then factored that into, or basically set that as the criteria of where a 1 RM actually takes place with a weightlifting movement. From there, we had them perform a hang high pull with relative loads based on their 1 RM hang power clean. We looked at 20, 40, 60, and 80%, and then we basically plugged all of these things into a regression equation because we looked at barbell velocity during the high pull at each one of those loads, and then basically connected the dots to where their end criteria velocity was, and tried to find the intercept of where their 1RM theoretically was. So it's a bit complicated, but hang high pull, 4 loads. We looked at peak barbell velocity and then plugged in their peak barbell velocity, the hang power clean, and just looked at that in the regression equation. Now, what we ended up finding with that was the estimated 1RM on average was about 98% of the 1RM hang power clean, which makes sense because obviously with a hang high pull, the barbell likely or will travel higher than what will during a hang power clean 1RM. However, we found out that this is not a good method to use because the range of estimated 1RMs was quite large. We had individuals that were estimated down, I believe, in the 70s in terms of their percentage. And then we had one person that estimated all the way up to, I believe, 150% of their 1RM. So it was 77.6% and 153.6%. So I don't care who you are. There's no way that you're doing a hang high pull with 153% of your hang power clean. So long story short, we found out that this is not an accurate method of estimating a 1RM hang high pull. And so we're still kind of looking for different methods that we can use for loading some of the pulling variations.
Okay, so maybe not that useful test at the moment, but there are other tests you probably would recommend using with the athletes. Could you suggest some and how we would use them?
Sure. Yeah. Right now we have a very large scale project that we're taking the time. It takes a while to write. We have another study that was accepted. It's hopefully will be published in JSCR here pretty soon, where we're actually estimating trying to find a 1RM of a jump shrug using barbell acceleration compared to gravity. So this has been done with a couple of ballistic variations by Irinu Laturco. He was doing some things with a jump squat and a barbell bench throw or a bench throw, and they were able to estimate or figure out what load determined what their actual 1RM was because the entire phase was considered propulsive, as in the propulsion phase never dropped below gravity. So there was no braking phase, for lack of a better term. However, because we only used up to 100% of their hang power clean max, we still found at that load that a jump shrug still has a braking phase, which generally speaking, not surprising, because if I was going to do a jump shrug, I can certainly jump or perform a hip hinge, do a jumping movement with more weight than I could do a hang power clean with. However, the caveat to that is, why would you? So if I'm going to perform a jump shrug, and what we've ended up finding is that we would use much, much lighter loads, generally 20-40% of someone's hang power clean for power development purposes. Now, some other things that we've been able to kind of shed a little bit of light on is whether or not we should be using percentages of someone's body weight to load some of these pulling variations. There's been a couple studies that have come out that have talked about using body weight with weightlifting derivatives. The problem with that is that we've kind of identified is it doesn't take into account anyone's relative strength. So it may be an initial starting point where you could say, okay, we're going to use a really light load here. Let's just use 10, 20, 30% of your body weight because, we've been able to do that with jump squats in the past. There's a lot of research on percentages of body weight that way. Jeff McBride, Prue Cormie's done some things on that as well. But we've also looked at percentages of someone's back squat 1RM to relate that back to what these loads actually are. In my opinion, that's probably going to be a little more accurate than percentages of body weight because we would actually take a percentage of their max that they did. However, when you're factoring that into the loads that you would use for a pulling variation as well, or even a catching variation, there are two different skills. It's a skill, obviously, to perform a hang power clean, drop under the bar, touch the bar, rack it appropriately, versus doing a squat. Do weightlifters need to squat? Absolutely. Should team athletes squat? In my opinion, yes, absolutely. But it may be a method or at least a starting point as long as we can factor in kind of a relative percentage of that, because that's going to be a determining factor. The other method that we're looking to do a little bit more research on has actually been around since the mid to late 80s, and that's set repetition best. That was talked about by Dr. Mike Stone. And the theory behind that is we can estimate what somebody's 1RM is in any exercise based on what they are performing in training. So it's a continual rolling estimation of a 1RM using a variety of equations. And because we're chasing heavier loads with kind of those force dominant movements like the mid-thigh pull, hang pull, counter movement shrug pull from the floor, these are all exercises that we might be able to actually estimate a 1RM for that particular exercise and then program off of that. And even you could probably work backwards to estimate some of the lighter variations off of those exercises as a possibility. Again, this is all theoretical. We haven't looked at this stuff yet, but that's certainly a possibility. The last that we're kind of looking at right now, a hot topic, is velocity-based research, velocity-based training. Within this study, I talked about that we're using a gym aware. We also used a Tendo unit and the rest in peace, the push band. But we actually basically created velocity zones across the loading spectrum for all of these exercises. So we looked at the jump shrug, hang high pull, hang power clean, the hang clean pull, and then the counter movement shrug. The jump shrug, hang high pull were performed with 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100% of their hang power clean. The hang power clean was 20, 40, 60, 80. We weren't going to do a 1RM during testing. And then the hang pull and the counter movement shrug were performed with 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, and 140% of their hang power clean max. So we were able to essentially create velocity bands, and you can certainly see an overlap and kind of a gray area where certain exercises start to show up within certain ranges. But also what we end up seeing is that for lack of a better term, ranking of exercises or the placement of the velocities of these exercises and their loads starts to shift dramatically when we're looking at center of mass velocity versus the barbell velocity. And as a result, we just need to question, and this is a weird thing to say, which velocity is actually important. For a weightlifter, barbell velocity is top-notch, very important, because you're not going to achieve your lift unless you create a high barbell velocity. At the same exact time, team sport athlete using these movements is more concerned probably with what their center of mass is actually doing, and as that's going to transfer to their actual sport itself. Say, for example, that someone's performing a power clean, but they fail to catch and they can't actually get it. If they put a good effort into the actual pull, they may still get a training effect out of it, even though they didn't catch the bar, which is kind of the theory behind our research with the pulling variations. So yeah, all of the research in terms of estimating a 1RM, body weight, percent back squat, set rep best, velocity zones, we're trying to look at everything across the spectrum in terms of how that we can prescribe these exercises better. If someone is going to train with weightlifting movements in general, they should probably start with pulling variations before getting into catching variations. One of the things that catching variations do is they certainly add a unique skill to be able to catch the bar. And someone who has developed the ability to pull properly may actually need that novel training stimulus of adding that skill. I know one of the things that a lot of coaches will say is that, well, a pull phase doesn't have a catch phase, so I won't necessarily get that benefit. I would argue that's not necessarily true for a couple of different reasons. First of which being that the barbell doesn't magically disappear when you do a pull. If you're holding onto the bar and you perform a pull and the bar comes back to kind of that mid-thigh position, you're still accepting a load. It's just in a different position. I would also make the argument that if you're only performing the catch phase for the eccentric benefit during that braking component, we may be missing the boat a little bit, because there's a whole spectrum of eccentric dominated exercises that we could be performing to potentially do that better, whether it's, the plyometric component, whether it's accentuated eccentric loading, flywheel inertial training. There's a variety of different things that we could be doing. That being said, catching variations, pulling variations are on the eccentric training spectrum. They are very unique in that regard. We've done some research on it, but there's certainly more that needs to be done with that as well. So to your point, you can certainly get a very good training stimulus just doing pulling variations, but that doesn't mean you should just shun catching variations completely, because they certainly have a place, as a lot of people have been using them for a long time.
Okay, one more point on catching derivatives. What would you have to say for them and their potential role in injury prevention?
Yeah, the one thing that I'll say about that, because that's an argument that people make to me regularly, and I'll say there's nothing the most specific thing about getting hit in rugby, in hockey, any other contact sport, is getting hit in those sports, because it's very unique how it happens. It's very targeted. A weightlifting movement can certainly train someone's braking abilities, a catching movement that is, can certainly train someone's braking abilities. But as I was just mentioning, I would make the argument that there are a lot of ways that you could do this as well. Here's an example. If we want someone to perform a catching variation, a clean variation, the bar is going to come to a certain height. It's going to come down. They're going to rack it. They may go into a full squat. They may catch it in a power stance. At the same exact time, I would make the argument that a re-rack of a push press or a jerk is probably going to give you a better braking stimulus than a catching variation would. And the reason why is that the downward displacement when the bar comes back down is so much greater than what it will be during a clean or a snatch, unless you just allow it to crash on you completely, which no one wants. They certainly will get a proper training. Do they serve a purpose when it comes to force absorption or force acceptance? Absolutely. But I would also make the argument that there's a lot of different things that we could be doing as well that may provide a similar, if not greater, training stimulus from the braking standpoint.
Did you measure any of these? Did you measure how different re-racking is in terms of forces to catching a clean?
No, it's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. We have not done that study yet.
Do you need any PhD students to hit you up?
Eventually. Right now at Carroll, I don't have a PhD program here. We currently don't have one at Pitt either.
Okay.
Master students, though, there's some potential there.
Master students?
Yeah.
Awesome. So if anyone in the audience wants to do a bit of research with world leading expert, they should hit you up.
Absolutely. I would love anyone interested in doing weightlifting derivative research. We'd love to have at Pitt.
Awesome. So let's shift gears a little bit. Put yourself in shoes of a coach who is, and let's make it for a team. So the team, football team or soccer team or rugby team is coming in. You are asked as a coach to make them strong and fast and amazing athletes. How would you go about setting up testing? What would you consider? And what tests would you recommend to do, depending on the different factors, and how you would then, according to the test, maybe set up the strength and conditioning program?
Sure. Yeah. I think a lot of it's going to be very specific to the sport. So if I'm working with athletes who are very, I'll just say speed strength oriented, I need to make sure that I am assessing those qualities. If they're very reactive, or if they're very, unless they're strength speed oriented, where it's, a lot of force with longer periods of time, it'd be the difference if I take a football team. There's certain athletes on that team that I want to test one way, and there's other athletes that I need to test another way.
Why is that?
The reason being is that each position is unique and they have different qualities. So if I have an offensive lineman, their job is to run into another person and keep them from allowing that individual from getting, behind them, around them, what have you. But the reality is absolute force makes a difference with that particular individual. versus if I have a skill player, I'll just say a defensive back, I need them to be very agile. I need them to be fast. They need to accelerate very quickly. They need to be able to change direction well. So I'm not saying that an offensive lineman doesn't need to be able to change direction, because they certainly do, but they are going to accelerate a much shorter distance than what the skill players are going to. So it's those unique qualities that will help me determine kind of the testing that we're going to do. That being said, there's very general tests that would certainly benefit or at least provide us with a little bit of information about them. Now, we know that offensive linemen, just based on their size and their weight, they're not going to jump very high, but we can also gain some knowledge from doing something like a counter movement jump in terms of how they actually perform that jump. For me, it's less about the jump height. It's more about how they achieve that jump height. So if I have two athletes that have the same exact jump height, but one of them produces a lot, they do it in a much, much shorter period of time. To me, that's more efficient than someone who takes a longer period of time. So, with my skill players, I need to be able to see that they are producing a really high rate of force development, both eccentrically and within the propulsion phase. But at the same exact time, they need to be able to transfer that ability to other skills. They need to be able to run. So I need to not only look at a sprint time, I need to look at at their sprint technique. Are they efficient, or are they flailing their limbs everywhere? So for me, it's not only about the output, it's about the quality of the movement as well.
So could we go into so you said jumping, so that's something you could potentially use. What other tests, let's say for a soccer team, would you consider?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I definitely want to get a measure of lower body force and or strength. So to me, an efficient test is obviously an isometric mid-thigh pull, being able to see how much absolute force they can generate, but also looking at their rate of force development in kind of an isometric cast. I need to be able to see their change of direction. So something like a 505 and or an arrowhead agility test is what we've used in the past with these athletes. I need to see how well conditioned they are. So something that is more intermittent, repeat type sprints. We typically use a yo-yo here in terms of the types of tests that we run for them. But I still want to be able to, as in terms of creating a well-rounded program, I also would test their upper body strength / power output, whether it's in the weight room or we currently use an upper body med ball throw, seated med ball throw that is, so that we can see kind of where their weaknesses actually are. So ultimately, when we test our athletes, we're creating a radar plot in terms of upper body tests, lower body tests, sprint, change direction, absolutely, their relative strength, etc., so that we can start to identify certain variables that we feel are going to transfer to an actual performance. So a wide variety of tests just to make sure that we're hitting everything.
Why would you test upper body with a soccer player?
Sure. I mean, one of the reasons why is everyone should be able to perform a throw-in, number one. Number two, we also still have to fend off defenders and kind of contain the soccer ball as well. So not to say that anyone's throwing elbows or anything, but you still have to be able to fend off an opposing player from the ball. So shielding the ball will certainly come from the lower body, but being able to, keep them at arm's distance is certainly another aspect that they should be well-rounded in terms of their strength abilities.
Awesome. How the setup would change if you would have a team of American football players, for example?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the tests are actually going to carry over. However, a common test that's been kind of related to some of their performances, the 5-10-5. So a couple different changes of direction. The one thing that I will say about that test is the surface at which someone performs it on is going to make a massive difference. If you perform it on the field versus if you were on turf versus if you're performing it on a basketball court, obviously not going to be able to directly compare those results. But in terms of their sprinting ability, which I certainly would do with our soccer players as well, I am more concerned with shorter sprints with the football players, given the fact a lot of the players won't be going all the way down the field. So I'm more concerned about how they accelerate. seeing as football is very intermittent and the plays don't last very long. Soccer is a bit more continuous. And, I'm not saying that they're sprinting the entire time. It's still very intermittent, but I still need to be able to see that they can reach top speed, especially my outside midfielders, as well as my forwards, especially if they send a ball through. But football players, I'm more concerned with a shorter sprint, but we're seeing where they can get to top speed, especially the skill players, is certainly important.
Oh, awesome. Would you have anything to say for basketball players or volleyball players where the movement is more this as opposed to this?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, being able to move laterally, especially with basketball players, on my front row volleyball players in terms of blocking and everything, they need to be able to do that as well. But for them, jump height does make a difference. I need to see what their maximum height is that they can actually reach. And part of that for volleyball, obviously, I need to be able to know where my hitters can get to if I'm setting to them. And obviously, where we can set up a block in terms of the range that someone can actually reach. Same thing with a basketball player. Jump height does make a difference. The ability to reach a higher rebound makes a difference. Being able to get to a ball first makes a difference. But yeah, the ability to cut with all of those athletes, especially like back row volleyball players, any basketball athlete should be able to cut and change direction well. But every single sport is so unique in the fact that they have very sport-specific skills. Everyone may start in what we call that athletic position, but where they go from there is so unique. My back row volleyball players are going to be very reaction driven because they need to see where the ball is going to go so that they can dive, they can run to it, they can set it, whatever they need to do, or they need to get out of the way if it's going out of bounds. But basketball players are obviously going to try to stay in front of their offensive player when they're on defense. So being able to be reactionary, but also the skills, dribbling, etc., that's not something that we would typically test. That's going to be, more of the tactical side of things and the skill of the actual sport itself.
So how, in the position of sport strength and conditioning coach, how would you stick to your wheelhouse, but also be helpful to the coach of the sport?
Yeah. So for me, there's always, a sport performance enhancement group, high performance team, whatever you want to call it, that the strength and conditioning coach, the sport coach, the assistant coaches, sports medicine staff, hopefully some academics as well, so that everyone can be in the same kind of mind space, head space, so that we're all driven for the exact same thing. Now, who makes the decisions? Head coach does. But that being said, being able to be in constant communication with them to be able to find common ground is going to be really important. As a sports scientist, if I'm delivering information to the coach that I know could theoretically impact, practices or games or anything like that, my job is to deliver it to the coach and explain it in the most efficient manner so that the coach can understand it. But at the same exact time, it may not even matter to the coach. They may say, well, 70% of this person is still way better than 100% of this person. I get it. Our goal is ultimately to enhance performance and reduce injuries. But obviously the end goal for everyone is to win. So if everyone has the same end goal and the same mindset, it's not too hard to find common ground.
Awesome. That's a good point. So kind of looking from the bigger picture, because in weightlifting, that's an individual sport. So coach-athlete relationship is to make the athlete better, hopefully in the long term, but sometimes in the short term too. With the team sports, you make each athlete better as a coach, but also there is this overarching goal of making the team win, which may not be necessary making each athlete stronger.
Yeah, I mean, the end goal is winning. In my opinion, conditioning coaches shouldn't be judged based on wins and losses, because we may create enhance the performance of all of these athletes. They're these physical specimens. They're going to go in there, they're going to run people over, and they're going to score goals, they're going to make baskets, whatever. Tactically, if the coach isn't utilizing those pieces and that the players aren't cohesive and it doesn't work, they may not win. And that's the reality. There are some freak things that happen in sports. The phrase that I would always get as a kid when I would get frustrated in baseball would be like, that's baseball. it is what it is. And you just kind of have to live with it and move on, because there are some wacky things that can happen in sports. And this is why sports aren't played on paper. This is why we play the games, play the matches.
That's what makes sports exciting, I guess.
Absolutely.
I have two short questions to finish off. The first one is your favorite color.
Favorite color is blue.
Any particular shade of blue?
No, not really. I'd probably say it's pretty much your standard blue, I guess. I really haven't. Blue is. It's funny because I end up looking at a variety of clothing that I have, and I just have a lot of blue hues of different colors, or different shades of blue rather. But it's just something I've gravitated towards.
Awesome. It's to be honest, a very popular color amongst researchers. I wonder whether there is something to it. And the last question is where people can find you online if they want to see what you're up to or ask you a question.
Sure. Yeah. My LinkedIn and everything is up to date. Finally at Timothy Suchomel on there. On both X and Instagram, it's Dr. T. Suchomel. And obviously we'll be updating those affiliations and everything here in the near future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim, for today, and see you next time.
Thanks for having me.